G'day there, trendsetters. I want to have a bit of a Chassidic reading of a Robert Bly fairy tale. Now, just to understand Robert Bly, he was one of the founders of the men's movement. He's a poet. And in a way, I've referred to him as Jordan Peterson before Jordan Peterson was Bebeten Shel Ima Shelo, when in his mother's stomach. And I think there's a lot that we can be learning from fairy tales, as Jordan Peterson is showing us and as Robert Bly has shown us. And somebody might ask, what is a Hasidic Jew doing, reading these shtusim of fairy tales? And my answer to that is twofold. First of all, there's an idea that's brought in Hayom Yom from the Rebbe Rayatz, that the best aspects of every ethos, of every belief system, whether it's capitalism or communism or whatever you want to say, the best aspects and truths in them can be found in the Torah. Because Torah is Lashon Hora'ah. Torah means instruction. So when there's great instruction and great wisdom, we can find those roots in the Torah. Now, the second part of that is, where do those Torah roots originate from? We have this idea that Avram Avinu, who was one of the first people to really come into terms with consciousness of a one single deity that connected with this world, he spread his wisdom, his primordial Torah, his pre-Sinai Torah, this esoteric wisdom across the globe. And those elements still resonate today amongst many of the mystical traditions and spiritual traditions across the globe. Now, granted, a lot of those things got a bit watered down and misinterpreted through broken telephone, like Purple Monkey dishwasher. It's possible that the message got diluted from one creator to many deities, and that's tragic. But not everybody merited to stand at Sinai, like the Jewish people did. And not everybody merits to have that still small voice reverberating inside of us from that revelation. So that's just a little preface while we're going down this road. And I'm going to try and link it with Pesach. So we're going to look at this story called The Lindworm. And it's towards the end of Robert Bly's book called Sibling Society, which he wrote in 1996. Iron John was written and published, I believe, in 1989, 1990. And around that time and leading up to that, Robert Bly was spearheading the men's movement. So let's do this story and look at it and try and look at it Chassidically. So the story starts in a castle, and there's a king and queen, and the queen is giving birth, and the midwife is helping deliver the child. But what comes out first is a small snake from the mother, and the midwife takes the small snake and throws it out the window, and then a healthy child is born. That snake represents perhaps the parts of us which are thrown out the window. Now, how are those parts of us thrown out the window? We can throw them out ourselves. They can be the parts of us which seem scary, which seem a snake, seem intimidating, uncomfortable, scary to look at. Or they can be the parts of us that are thrown out by society, by family, by life experiences. If we've been neglected as a child, we'll feel thrown out. If we've been abused as a child, we'll feel thrown out. If we've been to the army, we know that feel that we've been thrown out by society and by those in power. There are many things that we go through in life where we feel thrown out the window. And we have to come to terms with that, as we'll see in the story. So the story develops, and the child, the young son, becomes of marriageable age. And it's time for him to get married. And so he goes into a beautiful carriage, and he's going off to meet his wife. And he encounters on the road this snake that's been thrown out the window, this worm, but it's grown much larger and scarier and intimidating. And here at this point, perhaps people like Jordan Peterson and people who still have smatterings of dualism that linger from misinterpretations of mysticism would really panic at this scary, scary snake. And that's understandable. And it's understandable to have that approach when we lack the nefesh hasichlis, the self-energy, the chokhmah, the bina, and the das, especially chokhmah, bina, and das, that's taken from Chassidic thought, from Kabbalistic thought. Because we can really panic when we see this snake, this dragon, and think like St. George, we have to slay him. The Jewish approach is not to slay. The Jewish approach is to transform darkness into light. So when we see the nachash, when we see the snake, we don't panic. We think back to the lesson of Parshas Balak, which we discussed. We transform nachash, snake, into nechoshet, into copper, flexibility. We're going to look at this. We're going to look at this in the copper mirrors, like the copper mirrors that the Jewish women had the courage to look at. even in the face of great adversity of the Galus Mitzrayim. And there's the connection, as we'll see, the connection to the feminine, and the courage to look at the copper, which comes in this story. So we're not going to panic when we come across this snake and this dragon, but there's a bit of a panic and chaos here, because we know, though, that Tohu has great blessing. So we're not going to panic. But let's continue with the story. The snake encounters the young son and says, I have to marry first. You can't marry. So they said, all right, this guy's pretty intimidating. We better do what he says. So they have to bring a bride for this snake, this worm, this kind of dragon-like creature. And they bring a bride, and the snake wraps his tail around the bride 7 times, takes her into the bridal chamber, and she's never seen again. She's devoured. We don't know really what happens to her. And this happens a number of times. It happens up to 13 times. This snake, this parts of us that we've thrown out, as it were, as a saboteur, it undermines our relationships. How are we going to remedy this? We're going to see when it comes to the 13th bride. And when we come across 13, we have to understand we're dealing, without a doubt, with the Yud Gimel Midas Rachamim, the 13 attributes of mercy. And we're going to see how we're channeled here. And when we're dealing with 7, of course, 7 is Shabbat, but 7 is also the Midas, the 7 emotional attributes. We have the 3 intellectual attributes. This is our Nefesh HaSichlis, the intellectual soul. This is our self-energy, Chochmah Bin and Das. These are up here in the Moichin. But down below, we have Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus, our 7 emotional attributes. And these things get tainted. These things get overwhelmed. These things get burdened, and we have protectors that come out. Our Nefesh HaBahamis comes out. So the snake envelops these, and in the process envelops others, those around us, and they get devoured. They get hurt, they get damaged. Until we come and encounter the 13 attributes of mercy. But who is the 13th bride? We would expect somebody sophisticated, somebody with great intellectual and spiritual gifts. Who is it? It's the woodchopper's daughter. The woodchopper immediately takes us to Parshas Netzavim, where we're told, Atem Netzavim Hayom Kulchem. You're standing before God, all of you, from the heads of your tribes down to the woodchoppers and the water carriers, the simplest folk, the simplest essence of a person, of an individual who wants to connect to Hashem, to do things simply, not in a sophisticated way. The woodchoppers, it's the woodchopper's daughter. We're going to come to explain why the daughter. And the woodchopper also takes us to the idea that from the forest itself comes the handle for the axe. When we're dealing with a snake, when we're dealing with our difficult parts of ourselves, we're not going to slay them with steel. We're going to take an axe, and we're going to do jiu-jitsu. We're going to put the Jew in jiu-jitsu, where we're going to take, with courage and compassion and curiosity and care and connectedness, we're going to take the energy of the snake, the handle from the very forest itself, and we're going to use it to elevate it. And we'll see in the story how this is done. So it's the woodchopper's daughter. Now, why is it the daughter? We would have maybe expected the woodchopper himself to come in and intervene. The feminine energy, we need to understand, according to Kabbalah, is associated with gvura, with discipline, whereas the masculine energy is associated with chesed, loving kindness. Now, before the extremes of the men's movement and the extremes of the feminist movement come and arrest me and throw me in a gulag, hear me out here. Because when we're talking about feminine energy and masculine energy, of course, that is encapsulated in every individual. Zachar and Nekeva bara otam. We both have both aspects. And how we choose to manifest that ourselves in our lives and in our relationships is up to us and up to a negotiation with our partners. But let's continue. So we have the feminine daughter, and she's prepared to marry this snake. She's going to be the 13th bride, tapping into the 13 attributes of mercy, but with gvura, with discipline, with orderliness. This is associated with conscientiousness, industriousness, with a seder, with channeled, focused discipline. The idea of hey gvuros, 5 fingers, it's not enough to just have chesed, loving kindness. We have to channel it in some way. That's why we take the Kiddush cup from the right hand, pass it to the left hand, and then pass it back to the right. We're channeling it through like the 5 love languages. It's not enough to just say I have love. We have to manifest it in an orderly, channeled way, through discipline, through gvura. And so we have the aspect of the feminine manifesting gvura here, discipline. There's going to be an orderliness here. Now, what happens with this woodchopper's daughter is she goes and consults an elder woman. She's tapping into the vertical energy, understanding that there are people higher than us to give us wisdom. Today is Yud Aleph Nisan. We have to come to terms with the Rebbe and his higher wisdom and his availability. Even the idea of the Rebbe on the aspect of feminine. As it says in Likutei Moharan, there's an aspect of the tzaddik that is the mother of all the world. Because the tzaddik nurtures the world.